Joining me now, one of our favorite frequent guests, Misty Orpin, Executive Director of Common Ground Arkansas. Misty, always good to be with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Roby.
All right. The 94th General Assembly's regular session is in the books. Now we can only have special sessions or fiscal sessions. Lawmakers enacted the fewest number of laws since 1971, but it did not feel like there were fewer bills and laws that have been passed. Maybe it's the difference between some of them being so radioactive and some of them not being so radioactive. My point being is that fewer doesn't necessarily mean that they did less. What's your kind of takeaway from just that overall number of it was actually a lot fewer bills than we would have expected?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is you had a lot of new legislators this session that were coming in. So you had a high proportion of new folks there who were trying to kind of get their feet under them. And I will say they did. But I was looking at the numbers. 41 legislators of the 135 actually proposed 3 or fewer bills. And there were some legislators that didn't propose any bills at all. So yeah, there wasn't as much activity as maybe we thought going into it, but what activity there was pretty controversial in some cases.
Now, overall, there were, I think by your calculations, 1,439 bills filed, 890 signed into law. That's about a 62% passage rate there, which means 38% did not pass.
Right.
Or went into interim study there. Kind of what's your take? How does that kind of compare to previous sessions in terms of passage rate or non-passage rate? Do we have those kind of statistics to even do comparison to?
Yeah, I haven't done the backwards comparison yet. It is just such a monster, even looking at all of these bills and getting them. But that is actually the next iteration in this process. So give me a month, Roby, and I'll have that data for you, and we can talk about it then.
All right. What committees saw the most action this last time around?
Yeah, so if we want to look at the types of bills that were filed, I mean, most bills, not most bills, but the highest number of bills are going to be appropriation bills, right? Those are kind of nonpartisan bills, just keeping the state running. So that was 15% of the bills. But the second most was judiciary. So anything that dealt with law changes or our court system, that was 14%. And then on down from there, it was like public health, education, state agencies, insurance and commerce, and on down from there. But yeah, of course, apart from the standard budget bills, judiciary, and public health were the biggest tickets.
And I'm trying to think, I mean, judiciary would have been obviously where a lot of the, the governor's package on sentencing reform went through there, although that was really just one great big bill and maybe a couple of others just on the side. Why do you think that committee had as much activity or more activity than some of the others?
Yeah, I mean, it often does. That's not uncommon. They run a lot of technical correction bills through judiciary. So sometimes there's things that aren't really substantive, but they just need to change a word somewhere. And the best group to look at those word changes is your lawyers, right? To make sure that they're getting the best vetting. And most of your lawyers are going to be a judiciary committee, so that's where they get assigned. So a lot of them are just small, non-substantive bills. But then again, we did have big package judiciary system changes like you mentioned that came through there.
Yeah, some folks might argue maybe the lawyers aren't the best ones. just kidding. Let's talk about some of the legislators who were affected on both sides of the aisle. I'll let you kind of set this up in terms of your data and what you kind of have pulled through that. What did you look at to see which legislators might have been most effective, and then tell me which ones were the most effective?
Yeah, so I kind of looked at it two ways, like who passed the most bills, but then also who had the highest percentage of their bills that passed, right? So who was the most successful, who was the most effective. So if we want to look at who passed the most bills just straight out, it was Senator Misty Orpin. She had 38 bills that passed. Representative Jimmy Gassaway had 33. Senator Kim Hammer had 26, and Representative Lee Johnson had 26, and Senator Jonathan Disming had 22. So that rounds out your top 5. Now, their effectiveness, like their passage rates of the bills that they filed, is a little bit different. Like, Senator Orpin had 72% effective rate. Representative Johnson only had 52% effective rate, whereas Senator Disming, even though he's number 5, he got 81% of his bills passed. So there's kind of some differentiation in there. And I'll note that, being a committee chair really helps. So both Senator Irvin and Representative Johnson were the respective chairs of the public health committees in their houses or in their chambers. And so they both ran a bunch of public health bills, and the chairman of that committee, they can get them heard, they can get them pushed through. And then, Kim Hammer, what did he chair? I thought he chaired something, maybe he didn't. But I think that it really did make a difference. And then Representative Gasway runs a lot of those technical correction bills like we talked about in the Judiciary Committee. So there's just a ton of those that he's going to get pushed through.
Yep. Senator Dismang is typically the guy that runs the appropriation bills through the Senate side of things. I don't think he gets them assigned to him, but he actually does do a lot of that heavy lifting there. Those are the thankless jobs there, the technical corrections and the appropriations bills. Lane Jean in the House does the other thing there.
That's right.
All right. What else from the data that you've looked at can you glean that gives us some insight on what type of General Assembly this last one was?
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought was the most interesting was where bills died. So we talked about, like 38% of the bills didn't pass. So what happened with those bills? And I thought it was so fascinating to see, where was the graveyard? And the biggest graveyard was actually revenue and tax. And I think that's because the state is still absorbing some of these big tax cuts that they ran in previous sessions. And then there were a couple of really big ticket expensive items that they passed this session that are coming down the pipeline. And so I think whether they would admit it or not, they're a little skittish about the budget. And so you had all of these tax cut bills that were going in front of revenue and tax that they weren't even hearing or that they weren't voting on, because they are concerned the money's not there. So 61% of all the bills that were assigned to a revenue and tax committee didn't pass.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
Now that is interesting, and it makes sense because obviously the big tax cut bill was the kind of the last piece of the governor's puzzle that they kind of put into place. And then you've got all of those. I think what you see in a lot of those tax bills is a lot of, little bitty small kind of tax items, things that can have, not much impact, and they don't get considered when there's a big one like that to kind of put everything in place. So
they're super specific, like beginning farmers get a 10%. It's definitely they wanted to wait until they had the budget done and they knew the cost of these other items before they even considered any of those, and then they just ended up not hearing most of them.
I want to go back to one other thing on the effective legislator front. You mentioned Senator Misty Orpin being probably the most effective in terms of getting things passed. On the Democratic side, which you've got Democratic super minorities now.
Yeah.
It was interesting that Representative Andrew Collins and Representative Mark Perry and Senator Clark Tucker all had some modicum of success in getting some bills passed. Kind of explain what they achieved and maybe why you think they were successful.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah, because the top three Democrats getting things passed, Andrew Collins, you mentioned, had 9 passed and a 60% success rate, which for a Democrat is pretty good. I mean, a lot of the bills that he runs are very moderate bills. Like he doesn't come off as a firebrand. Same thing with Senator Clark Tucker. Clark Tucker does a really great job of working with his Republican colleagues. He could run a masterclass in how to, work with people that you disagree with while still being respectful toward their viewpoints and not alienating them. He is so good at that. And then, of course, like you said, Representative Mark Perry, he actually had an 83% passage rate, even though he only passed 5 bills, but that's still significant for a Democrat in this climate. Overall, I'll mention the amount of bills that were passed. Let me see if I can find that. For the Democrats, I thought this was interesting. Of the bills that were filed, the Republican legislators filed an average of 10 bills per Republican legislator, and the Democrats only filed an average of 5 bills per legislator. So not only were they not passing a lot of bills, they weren't filing a lot of bills. And of course, I think that's because they knew that there wasn't a big chance of being effective. And it might be a waste of time, or maybe if they had something they wanted done, they would give it to a Republican to sponsor it.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that it would come out to 5 bills per Democratic legislator, because I would think with the way that the majorities and the minorities work on there, that it would be smaller than that. So that is interesting too. The data is always interesting. All right, when you go back through and you figure out how this compares to other sessions, we're going to have you back on. We're going to see where this one fits into the the realm of the last several decades. So,
Well, you've given me my homework. I'm on it.
Misty Orpin with
Thanks,
Common
Roby.
Ground Arkansas, as always, I appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate it.